So this video is about the subject of suicide. I believe it's a huge issue in today's world, and I think it's something that needs to be openly spoken about. I think there's this tendency for it to be brushed under the carpet because it's not exactly brushed under the carpet, but let's say maybe it's not spoken about as much as it should be. There's no point glossing over the reason why I wanted to make this video, because it would be a bit hard to sort of talk about what I want to talk about without mentioning this. It's something I do relate personally to, because there's been times in my life, more than once, where I've come very close to considering that action, taking my own life. Don't worry, this isn't a suicide video. I'm just talking about the general subject. So I do understand the sort of psychology that goes through someone's mind when they consider that, and I think the number of people who have considered it is probably a lot higher than, well, there certainly wouldn't be official statistics available on that. The statistics available on the number of people who go through with it, and in the UK that's 3 times higher than the homicide rate. Britain has a relatively low homicide rate, I believe, about 1,000 a year, but our suicide rate is about 3 times higher. So 3 times as many people kill themselves as are murdered by other people. And again, those are rough figures, but I've seen that on sites like the Samaritans and so on, which is a great organisation. If you're not familiar with them, they're an organisation that basically, they don't necessarily offer advice, but they're people who listen to those in distress and don't judge. It's a very good organisation that I've used their services a few times. And it's just volunteers who listen to your problems. There's equivalent organisations all over the world. But back to the subject of suicide. I should say the one thing that always stopped me going ahead with it, well, not the one thing, there was a few things. At those times I was in emotional despair. I've suffered with depression more than once in my life, and when I say depression, I don't mean just feeling bad. Anyone who's been through this will know how powerful a force it is. It can really mess up your entire life. It's not just feeling bad. Everyone feels bad and stressed out, but depression is a long-term negative cloud over your whole life. Whatever little pleasures you have, that doesn't change that cloud. And depression is, of course, the root factor that ultimately leads to suicide. No one kills himself if there's no driving force behind it. I understand a bit about the background to the process that's involved in suicide. Most suicides are not spontaneous. Most people who consider doing it most people who do it have considered it numerous times before, but that is just the point where they go through with it. Some people maybe almost go through with it but are pulled back at the last moment, either by outside intervention or something in them clicks that they really don't want to do it. Now, I had an experience in China when I almost drowned. I was swimming across a river. I'm an average swimmer, but basically I got tired and I almost drowned. And I remember at that point I clearly didn't want to die. And I think, so the reason I mention that is because the times that I felt suicidal, the notion I have is that I want to die. but the reality is I just want to be somewhere else. I think most people who commit suicide don't actually want to die. What they want is to be in another dimension, they want the problems in their life to end, but they've seen no way out. They've seen no way whereby their situation can be made, whereby emotionally they can feel any better than what they're feeling. Or even if they think they might feel better, they don't want to live with a certain situation. So that's why they take that extreme step. And suicide is extreme because it's essentially killing. And you wouldn't kill strangers, so killing yourself is, and this is where I bring in some questions, is suicide selfish? I think the conventional view is that it is. Because, sorry, it's tired, it's late, but the conventional view is that suicide is selfish because you're doing untold damage to the people that you leave behind. Obviously it depends on the age of the person who's involved, but it could be your parents, siblings, close friends, lovers. It could be anyone that's close to you. And I think there's a tendency for a lot of people in that situation to genuinely believe that no one cares. So maybe it's a way almost of punishing people who they might feel have not cared about their concerns, or they feel that they've tried to talk about issues and there's been a deaf ear, which is where organisations like Samaritans are great. But what I do want to make clear is people who are facing that are not crazy people. They're not morbid. They don't have an obsession with death. But they've reached a point where they are so going through such emotional turmoil that they see no way out. Now, I can't talk for everyone, but I suspect probably the two biggest causes of suicide are financial problems and relationship problems. Those two things. There's probably other factors as well. Well, bullying would be a big factor among young suicide victims, and with others, but I think bullying is also a big factor. But those things are definitely, and if you think about it, I mean, financial anxiety, money is a necessary evil. We need money in life for stability. That just goes without saying. And if you're having financial problems, big financial problems, then the pressure can be terrifying and overwhelming. Relationship problems, I don't care what anyone says, everyone needs intimacy of some sort or another. I'm not necessarily talking about sex, but some sort of intimacy. And if you feel betrayed in a relationship, especially if you've been with someone for years and that person's let you down in a big way, maybe you've been a victim of, they've betrayed you, they went with someone else, so on. Now that hasn't been my situation, but I imagine that would be devastating, which is why I've got a very low view of cheating in a relationship. But there isn't really any goal for this video, so to speak. It's just a video to talk about the subject, because I think it's better than, I think to some extent there is a taboo around suicide, to some extent. I think people who contemplate it don't want to talk about it because they're worried they'll be seen as attention seekers, or like they've got this fixation with death, like they're crazy people or something. The truth is, there can be very few people who haven't felt despair at some point in their life. Very occasionally you get these very, very upbeat people, and I wouldn't take anything away from them, but you do get some people who just seem to be very optimistic people, and you know that I wish the best to them. But It's very rare. Most people at some point in their life have at least one period of absolute despair, and depression is a massive health problem in society. And it is interesting that suicide rates in developed countries tend to be pretty high. Countries like Japan, Scandinavian countries, suicide rates tend to be very high, and that's interesting because they're very wealthy countries. The standard of living is very high in those countries, so that then it proves that the economy of a nation doesn't necessarily correlate with the happiness of a nation. A study was done recently. Of course, none of these things are concrete science, but Bhutan was named as the world's happiest country. Bhutan's only a middle-income country. If you look at the GNP index, I think it's only about halfway. So it's a country that's certainly not wealthy. Maybe it's not dirt poor, but it's certainly not wealthy either. And yet it was voted the happiest country in the world. I believe Costa Rica ranks high, and Denmark, the Netherlands. Those are 4 countries that I've come across that have been called the happiest country in the world. So it would be very interesting to see because there isn't really consistency there. I mean, the Netherlands and Denmark are wealthy countries, Costa Rica and Bhutan not particularly wealthy. So it's obviously not connected directly to development of a nation. Although, of course, that's a huge issue of our times. I just don't. It's not the only thing. Economic health of a nation is not the only thing in terms of the happiness of its citizens. Maybe those societies have more compassion within them. I don't know. I really don't know. I do know in Britain at the moment there's very little compassion. I'm not saying from individuals. There's lots of compassionate individuals, generous individuals, and as a nation Britain's very generous, but I'm sorry, I'm going to get a little political here, but 3 years of a Tory-led government, I believe, has definitely desensitized this country. Toryism always does that. It's always survival of the fittest with them. And I do apologise in making this political, but there has been a huge number, well, it does relate, because there has been a huge number of suicides in recent months and years because of this government's repressive welfare policies. People are being literally driven over the edge. Literally. They're literally being hounded to death because they see no way out. So back to the point I was making about selfishness. I don't think anyone who kills himself wants to hurt other people because they're facing a despairing situation where they see no way out. But I do think we have to acknowledge that it is a selfish act, because what you're doing is you might be ending the pain that you're going through emotionally, but you're going to put a huge amount of pain on others, and then that's very selfish to put them through that, and cruel actually, to put the people left behind. I mean, to think what your parents would go through, or your loved ones. It's not a pleasant thought. Really, everything I want to say wouldn't fit into a 15-minute bandwidth. I'm just checking the time there. But I would say I know that when I've snapped out of those suicidal tendencies, then I've had moments where I've either enjoyed myself or I've just seen everyday things which have somehow motivated me to just stupid things like wanting to know what will happen in the future, not even necessarily personal things, just wanting to witness history, see what inventions will be and so on in the future. Those sort of little things can sometimes motivate you to stay alive, as bizarre as that sounds. It's not necessarily your own, people always say, oh, think about the kids and so on, but if you're someone who doesn't have children, that's obviously not relevant. So there's other factors. Right, this is coming to the end of the frame now, but Let me know your thoughts on this subject. It's a very important subject, and I might make another video to lead on from this. Thank you.